And now on the line is Barry Grant from Extern Problem Gambling Project. Barry, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Dan.
Barry, I've done several interviews with you in the last few years, and you always spoke to me in your capacity as CEO of Problem Gambling Ireland. Before we talk about the recent budget in relation to problem gambling, can you fill me and our listeners in on what is this big move to Extern that has happened recently?
We've been working on this for, I'd say, about a year now, and we've been working in collaboration with Extern for a large portion of that time. So I suppose Problem Gambling Ireland, which was the original charity that I founded about 5 years ago, we've now are in the final stages of a process of winding down the original charity, Problem Gambling Ireland, and merging all of the name, the brand, everything that goes with it with Extern. So I'm working full time with Extern, and my colleague Tony O'Reilly are working full time with Extern. We're rebranding the project as the Extern Problem Gambling Project. And for people who may not have heard of Extern, they're actually a huge charity across the island of Ireland, about 600 staff. They work in a lot of kind of diverse areas. So they would have homeless projects, they would have addiction services, they would work with young people, bail supervision, they would work in some of the prisons in Northern Ireland, they would work in some disability services, traveller projects. So they're very kind of diverse organisation with a lot of different types of projects in there. And I suppose from our perspective, looking to develop more services and especially expand into Northern Ireland, it made really good sense for us to merge with Extern. So that's where we're at with that, yeah.
Okay, and Extern am I right in saying you are more well known in Northern Ireland than you are in the Republic of Ireland?
Probably, yeah. So Extern started out in Northern Ireland about 41 years ago, and that would have been their original base. I think they've been operating in the Republic for, at least a decade, maybe more. But I suppose the bulk of the staff and the projects would still be in Northern Ireland, yeah.
Okay, to talk a bit about the budget, first of all, could you remind our listeners as to what you were calling for in the budget, and then tell us exactly what was actually promised when it was revealed?
Well, as always, we're calling for a regulator to be established. So I suppose that was one good piece of news, that 7 years down the line, they've actually budgeted for the establishment of the Office of Gambling Regulator in 2021. A small amount of money, I think about 100,000, but it means that they're kind of putting a timeline on that. Outside of that, I mean, in previous years, we've looked for a portion of the betting duty, which is the money that comes in, the taxation comes in from people placing bets on sports. That's in the region of about 100 million a year. Previously, we've lobbied looking for a portion of that to be allocated to treatment and prevention services across all services in Ireland. That still never happened, but they did manage to increase the funding to the horse racing and greyhound fund by another 12 million, bringing it up to 96 million. So I suppose the biggest thing will be the movement towards establishing a gambling regulator. That's been budgeted for. Outside of that, still nothing for treatment or prevention services around gambling addiction in Ireland. It remains to be seen. I know there were increases, say, across mental health and parts of the health service. So maybe in the detail of that we might see something, but unfortunately nothing else on the gambling addiction side.
Okay, to talk just a bit more about the good news in the budget, it is a welcome development, isn't it, that the process of having a gambling regulator is coming into being?
Yeah, because that can has been kicked down the road for about 7 years now with no movement of any kind. This is the first kind of substantial or meaningful piece of movement where you have the Department of Justice saying, look, we're establishing the Office of a Gambling Regulator in 2021. There's been a budget allocation for that. So I suppose that's a bit of a relief for people, organisations like ours who've been campaigning for years to try and get some movement on this. And hopefully we can see some regulation of the sector. I mean, realistically, you're probably looking at 2022 before that regulator is up and running at best.
Okay, and it's bitterly disappointing, I believe, that the government did not increase or allocate any money from the betting levy to fund problem gambling services, isn't it? It must be very kind of bitterly disappointing and frustrating for you, yeah?
Yeah, certainly. I'd personally find it very frustrating. A lot of people who kind of work in this space find it very frustrating. I mean, the government can find the means to support the flagging or the failing horse racing and greyhound industries in Ireland. That's fine. Like, we're not trying to stop the government from doing that if that's what they want to do, and a lot of people are employed in those areas. But I suppose we would like to see some balance provided where there's an acknowledgement that a lot of harm is caused by gambling in this country and that funding needs to be allocated. Now, we've put in parliamentary questions to Stephen Donnelly on this a couple of times recently, and the minister keeps referring to the social fund and that there will be a social fund created when we have a gambling regulator, and that will fund treatment and prevention services. But sure, that's been promised for the last 7 years, and thousands of people have suffered greatly in that time in the absence of any funding for treatment services or prevention services. So I suppose what we've been proposing for years will be that some of the betting duty will be allocated as an interim measure while this race goes on for the social fund to be established. But yeah, we'll wait and see if something turns up in some format in terms of government funding.
Okay. Barry, are you still based in Waterford?
Yeah, our main office in Waterford. I mean, everything, we actually had to close our Dublin office recently just due to the COVID restrictions, and it was an overhead that we couldn't really kind of justify. All of our work has moved online anyway, so we're doing most of our work from home. Even the Waterford office is kind of shuttered up temporarily for the moment. So it's all online. We're still working with people. We're on the phone. We're on video calls, Zoom calls, Skype calls, working with people in any way we can. And I think everybody's kind of getting used to working in that way at the moment. So we're still working away, but everything's gone remotely for the moment.
Okay, bearing in mind that Extern work in Northern Ireland also, a lot of our listeners may not be aware of what's going on in Northern Ireland, but can you give me a summary in your and your colleagues' experience as to how bad the problem gambling situation is today on the island of Ireland, north and south?
Okay, we're talking according to the study by the Irish government here in the Republic of Ireland, it's about 0.8% of the adult population, so somewhere in the region of 30,000 people plus. Now, a lot of people would dispute that figure as being on the low end, but that's the figure that was arrived at in the Republic by the HSE. In Northern Ireland, they've had two prevalence studies that would show 2.3% of the population, so 3 times the problem gambling prevalence rate in the north. It would put Northern Ireland as the kind of highest problem gambling prevalence region anywhere in Europe and one of the highest in the world. So, you know, when the study in the Republic came out a couple of years ago, you know, a couple of people, ourselves included, made the argument that it's hard to believe that the rate in Uri will be 3 times the rate in Dundalk. But anyway, across the island of Ireland, problem gambling is definitely a major issue. There's no two ways about that. And I suppose in Northern Ireland, one of the issues is that they also don't have a regulator. So across the island of Ireland, there's no gambling regulator because the regulation of gambling is devolved to Stormont. So the regulator that presides over Great Britain, or kind of England, Scotland and Wales doesn't apply to Northern Ireland. So their gambling legislation goes back to 1985, kind of predates the internet as we know it. So much like here in the Republic, across the island of Ireland, we're light years behind in terms of regulation and the kind of protections that would need to be in place in the modern gambling market. But definitely Northern Ireland, a huge issue there, and just like down here, major issues on the regulation side as well.
Okay, just a couple more questions, Barry. You have a new podcast to start in the last while, don't you?
Yeah, that's going great actually. Thanks for mentioning that, Darren. The Problem Gambling Podcast, it's up on Spotify and most of the major podcasting platforms. Anybody wants to check it out. We had Niall McNamee on this week. We've had Declan Lynch, Professor Colin O'Gara. We've had a lot of great guests on. For anybody who wants to check it out, and we're getting a lot of good feedback from people who, I suppose, are concerned about their own gambling, maybe haven't made their minds up yet about seeking help, and they're kind of looking around for bits of information. So we're getting a lot of good feedback on it, and there's different interviews, different topics that we cover there. So yeah, it's going much better than we expected. We've had about 13,000 listens on it, I think, so far, which I was amazed by because it's quite a niche area in a small country with a small population. So yeah, we're delighted with that.
That's cool, yeah. Okay, to come towards the end of the interview, do you want to tell our listeners anything else about your work over the next few months in relation to problem gambling on the island of Ireland?
Well, we'll be continuing to provide the helpline service. Unfortunately, the free counselling service that we were in a position to provide for about 12 months from the last summer of last year until summer of this year, that funding has run out. We got a donation, philanthropic funding, to provide that free service for a year. So we're back to a position where we're still able to provide a counselling service. We do have to charge for it. All of the details of that are on the website, problemgambling.ie, but we're still providing information, helpline supports. Tony O'Reilly, my colleague, co-author of Tony 10, is out doing a lot of talks in secondary schools at the moment. So a lot of schools, which is great to see, are identifying that problem gambling is something that younger people can start to dabble in, or certainly that gambling will be in, just to kind of raise awareness around the risks of that. I suppose we're lobbying both sides of the border. There's an all-party group in Stormont looking at gambling-related harm at the moment, and we hope to be presenting to them, and we'll keep the pressure on the politicians in Leinster House as well to try and get the gambling regulation over the line here.